Hello, Meoni here, and welcome back to our part 2 of a localization team interview with Final Fantasy XIV's team. This is located on the Final Fantasy portal site on the Square Enix website. A link will be at the top of the description of this video to take you here. Please go and give it some love. I take no credit in the writing or anything to do with this particular article or the interview questions. They are fantastic and they are in-house at Square Enix. It's a fantastic read if you want to go, but if you'd rather actually have it read to you, then stick around as we continue. So the first part also will be on the channel if you want to search for that. I'll provide a link as well. First question. While most RPGs have many NPCs with any number of lines, a world the size of 14's entails a massive number of NPCs to match. Are there any methods or tools the localization team uses to keep track of and organize all of that dialogue? Kate says, our translation tool does allow us to search by character, thankfully, but a lot of the consistency and characterization comes down to old-fashioned human work. Usually when we're writing a character, we search them up and read a bunch of their old text to remember how their speech sounds. If it's a character we're not particularly familiar with, we'll get one of the translators who has done a significant amount of work with that character in the past to check our translations and point out any elements we might be missing. Just end quote there. Just as an interesting piece of information, if anybody reads Japanese, the Japanese merchandise for the Digital Fan Festival comes with 3 books that you can purchase, and they have all of the dialogue in the game for each expansion so far, including the base game. And it's literally every single NPC. It's literally an encyclopedia of anything that anyone has ever said, which frankly I would love to one day see translated. Just to have that in front of you must be incredible. So if anybody does read Japanese, that's a great top tip for you there. Next up then, do you have any favorite characters, either from a translation perspective or just personal preference? Pierre takes this first. From a translation perspective, I like characters with, not necessarily a lot, but a strong personality, like Magnai, Asahi, or Emmett Selk. We have to write a lot of exposition in a game, because the point is to share all of those tidbits of lore and story with the players. Having a character with a particular way of addressing you makes listening to him or her much less tedious. Personally now, he says, I think my favourite is Emmett Selk, because in all of his Asian-ness, he was the most human character of all. I also like characters that have gone through a complete story arc and matured or evolved because of that experience, like Alphino or Fordola. End quote. So, talking about Fordola there, there's spoilers aside, I cannot wait to see what happens next with that character, especially in Endwalker, so I'm hoping we see some loose ends tied up there in the future. David answers, apart from the brilliant Emmett Selk with all of his human flaws, I've become very fond of Elidibus, both text-wise as well as of the voice actor, who filled the role with so much power and emotion, a very powerful villain to our heroes, while outwardly deadly determined to fulfill his duty to his people, who is in truth torn by an inner conflict. And Kate says, loving a character definitely makes them more fun to translate, and like everyone else, I adore Emmett Selk. I only did a little bit of his dialogue in the 5.0 main scenario, but I was fortunate enough to translate the short story, Ere Our Curtain Falls, and he really is a delight. I also like characters, she says, that are a little bit ridiculous, which puts Giot up near the top of my list. Gyoshin and Saigetsu the Enlightened from the Namazu Crafting Quest are personal favourites too, though if I've done my job right, they're more than a little bit ridiculous, end quote. So I have Kate to thank then for my favourite questline in the game then, because the Namazu questline was, honestly, the writing on that, the translation, everything, was better than Stormblood itself. And I'm not kidding there. I absolutely loved it, every minute of it, and it was an absolute joy. So I guess thank you so much, Kate, and the rest of the team. Next up, they say, on the topic of NPCs, the characters of 14 also speak a variety of dialects. In the Japanese text, there are many tones of voice, sentence-ending suffixes, and so on that don't easily translate into other languages. How does the localization team go about deciding which vernaculars are used by whom in the world of Eorzea? We'd love to hear any specific examples you could share. So Kate takes this. This being a fantasy game actually makes dealing with dialects easier, as we only need to worry about the real-world cultural baggage that comes with certain dialects insofar as it's actually serving a purpose. So we can look at each character's manner of speaking holistically. What we do in English is examine what the character's Japanese speech indicates, where they're from, what archetype they fall into, that sort of thing. And then consider how a person of similar background and personality would speak in English. Do they use a lot of fancy words, such as verily, or more simple ones like right? Do they speak in contradictions or truncate their words a lot? Truncate. Do they have any mannerisms or words they like to use, either from their culture or because of their personality? Are they hesitant, direct, long-winded? And we have a picture of the Mughals there. That's hilarious. That's just slurring, basically. That's all they do, the Mughals, when they're drunk. As for the ever-present ending suffixes, when a single character has a verbal tick like that, it usually indicates some sort of archetype. So we approach it using the method outlined above. Beast tribes are a bit more complicated because they pretty much always get one for the whole tribe. Some translations approach this by just transliterating. Wow, that's interesting. Transliterating the Japanese, which works, but only to an extent. It's cute when Mughals say kupo, right? But a lot of these endings are fundamentally indistinguishable in English. They mostly just read as two random syllables. So in effect, if all the beast tribes did that, they would all have the same speech pattern. That would be outright annoying with as many tribes as we have in 14, and it wouldn't make each tribe distinct like it does in the Japanese. Yeah, I mean, they've done a fantastic job to give them an identity, and that's what this is really about, creating something that gives not only a backstory, but a signifier. Like, it's kind of like a sonic ident, but in words, isn't it? Like, when you turn on the PlayStation, you have that particular sound. Everyone can now hear that in their head. It's the same thing as you want when you read something. You want to have that image in your head at all times when you associate the Mughals. Even without sound on in the game, you want that to be so familiar for your brain to instantly know that that's a Mughal, even if the Mughal is not on screen. So I think they've done a fantastic job there, personally. Look at the Namazu. Oh, they're adorable. What we do instead then, continuing, is look at what effect the Japanese pattern is having on the way the sentence sounds. All of the Sahagin sentences start with a sort of sh sound, for example, which is why in English you get shore walker and such, with the elongation of the sh sounds. The Namazu have a habit of adding pe into their sentences. So we looked at how the popping P makes their speech feel choppy and excitable, and went fully abrupt and enthusiastic, yes, yes, and no, no in English. A big consideration when deciding what to do with these nowadays is readability, so we try to keep it simple. The Namazu aren't simple, they're very complex. I find that offensive. Dear. David says, rather than dialects, we focus on tone of voice instead. While not an exact emulation of the Japanese original, we match a character's voice to aspects such as their physique, societal standing, which culture they hail from, and so on, and try to come up with a fitting speech pattern. Speaking of dwarves, the dwarves that were introduced into Shadowbringers serve as a good example of this practice. They have a specific way to greet others, holadrio, or to use specific terms to distinguish outsiders, botlos, people without dwarven beards. Their culture is about mining, and engineering. They relish a good feast. Men and women wear false beards and fancy helmets. They love to ridicule their rival tribes, but they are never vicious or nasty, but light-hearted and positive by nature. All these things you will find reflected in the way they express themselves. Pierre says, a lot of Final Fantasy XIV races mirror those of 11, so we reuse the same speech pattern for those. For the new ones, we take inspiration from the Japanese, of course, but also from the characters themselves, and the image we have of them. Since 14 is voiced, however, we have to be careful and sometimes even adapt. For instance, the rolling R sound of the Makote, specific to the French version, has proved to be challenging for actors to pronounce, so we sometimes dial it back, end quote. I wasn't even aware that there was a rolling R sound from a Makote voice. That's interesting. Specific to the French version. So there are like specific nuances to each language then. Oh, I kind of want to see what the French version of just seeing some of like Y'shtola speak. That's going to be really weird. Or like oh my goodness, I want to play it in French now. Oh, that's quite interesting. There we go. Next up, many times a concept that makes total sense in one culture is near incomprehensible outside of its native country and language. Can you give us some insight into and/or examples of how the localization team approaches content like that? We would very much appreciate if you could include any interesting examples you might have. Kate says, the good thing about translating fiction is that stories can be told in a variety of ways, which allows us to be pretty flexible in our approach, much as with our characterization example above. What we look at with culturally specific elements is their place in a narrative and the purpose they serve. A scene I translated recently, for example, included a fairly common Japanese trope, one character hesitantly asking the other if they could drop the slightly formal san suffix when calling them by their name. We don't use Japanese name suffixes in the English version of 14 at all. They don't convey the same interpersonal nuances to those not familiar with Japanese culture, and there are plenty of suitable ways to express the relationships between characters in English. To keep a long story short and spoiler-free, what this scene is actually doing is demonstrating this character's desire to form a friendship. This friendship echoes an important goal-related partnership the character used to have, so much like the Japanese is having the character asked to be friends in a roundabout way, they express their desire for the same sort of close partnership in English by asking if it's okay to think of the other person's goal as their own too. If Japanese flavor is significant, as in the country of Hingashi, we will sometimes take the easier approach of transliterating the Japanese word. If you don't know what a makoshi or a happy is, for instance, you can look that up on the internet and find some pictures of Japanese festivals that will make the Namazuno festival efforts seem even more entertaining. If you don't, they still have that, ooh, Japanese culture ring to them, and the in-game context makes clear what they mean. The last part is key. Using transliterated Japanese is a much less fraught decision than it would have been 20 years ago, especially given that everyone playing 14 has internet access by default, but we still take into consideration whether it's going to confuse people or hide a meaning the Japanese scenario meant to get across. End quote. That's quite interesting, especially considering, you know, when you approach Hingashi, there is a lot of Japanese references there. You know, stuff like dango. You know, not everybody probably knows what dango is, although I would imagine a lot of people do, considering they watch anime as well. But not everyone is under the same blanket, are they? Not everybody knows. So it's good to have that sort of, you know, visualization and explanation. Pierre says, that's the core of the localization work. When it comes to the text, I don't think there are concepts that are so foreign that they can't be explained naturally given enough space. Now, when it comes to graphics, it's something else. For instance, we recently had this scene where you see drunk dwarves. In the original version, their eyes looked like the number 3, which for Japanese people indicates that they are dizzy. Since players might not get this reference, we suggested to the development team to use spirals. Oh yeah, there you go, another cultural difference. That's quite interesting. Next up, related to what you said about carrying over Japanese terms, such as happy, directly into English, there are also cases like, for example, the skill pronounced the same as the English invincible, in Japanese being translated as hallowed ground. What is the reasoning behind changing words and titles that are already in English into different English? Also, are there any similar examples in other languages' localizations? Is that really what it is? Is hallowed ground invincible? That's quite interesting, isn't it? So Kate says, regarding why the English that appears in the Japanese version and the localized English is sometimes different, there are a couple of reasons. One is that the fundamental localization philosophy of 14, as established by Yoshida-san, is that all languages should offer an equivalent experience to the players. If something makes the Japanese audience go, cool, it should not make the English audience go, oh, okay, I guess. Words in foreign languages sound pretty cool. They just do. When anime was taking off in the US, people would say kawaii and Nico, even though we, of course, already have the words cute, cat. But when you start taking those words and putting them back into the original language, they often sound more boring than anything. That's not going to give us the equivalent player experience we're looking for, so we indeed do deviate from the Japanese for this reason sometimes. Another thing that people may not consider, though, is that in some cases we come up with the English names for things first. Coolness problem solved. But the name might still be difficult for Japanese players to understand or look like a key smash when transliterated into katakana. So there are cases where the Japanese side is like, cool, English, be shame if something happened to it, just as we do at times when localizing Japanese terms. We do try to avoid the scenario of totally different English in different versions of 14 to the extent that we can by discussing names in advance. The Japanese side is quite accommodating and happy to work with our suggestions, and we really do our best not to make more work than is absolutely necessary, but sometimes it's simply not possible to find something that will be clear to Japanese players and sound exciting to English players as well. Pierre says, there aren't many skills with a French name in the game, but one instance where we had to use another name, even though the original was in French, was for the resource used by dancers, the esprit. That's a word we were already using for the mind attribute, so we needed to come up with something else to avoid confusion, and we ended up using fascination. A more common issue for us, though, is that Japanese can draw from any language to create names by transcribing them. We need to make sure each skill's name is unique. But what do you do when the same name shows up twice in Japanese? For instance, once in regular Japanese and once as a transcribed English name. In that case, we use a synonym or a name that conveys the same idea. However, Japanese uses synonyms too, and since it can draw from several languages, we are running out of them much faster. Oh yeah, I never thought about that. I suppose at the end of the day, you're going to just have to create words, aren't you? That's the only thing left. Next up, they say, what about lines you've personally translated? Do you have any that you're particularly fond of or remember being especially challenging? Pierre says, it's not one of mine and we only used it a couple of times in a game, but there's one swear that comes to mind. Bon Dieu de bon sang de bordel de bombo en bois. I'm sorry, I've completely butchered the French language there, but I'll continue. I like this one. It's hard to explain the details for non-French speakers, but it is simply a swear word in the world of 14 and contains the 12, as well as known monster name bomb. It's definitely one of my favorite dialogues for French. Interesting. Now for challenging, I would say the Pixies speech pattern. One law point is that those creatures are agender. We used a male/neutral agreement for the Sylphs back in 2.0, but for the Pixies we wanted to try something different. Since this gender neutrality is never mentioned in the main story, we didn't want to use special words that would warrant a reaction of surprise from the human characters. And so we thought, what if they never use gender-specific words to refer to themselves? That way we have this speech characteristic without influencing the flow of the story. We ended up going with this, but soon realized it would be sometimes very hard, even when using a lot of grammatical tricks to epicene words. That's another big word I've never heard before. epicene. There we go. Kate says, while I don't regret asking if we could remove them from the gender binary, as it was about time that we established that precedent somewhere, it's a surprise tool that will help us later, seeing the challenges that presented for other languages has really been eye-opening. I am extremely thankful that our localization colleagues and the event team, members in charge of world lore creation and story, were willing to work with us there. Personally, my favorite translations are the ones where I feel a strong attachment to the story and characters and end up with an English version that I'm confident has the same emotional response as the Japanese. One of my favorite sections is that, in that respect, is the healer role quest in 5.0. Though I can't quote the lines in specific because of spoilers, there's a scene toward the end of that questline that I found very moving, but is written to emphasize a turn of phrase that sounds beautiful and elegiac in Japanese, and clunky and emotionless when rendered directly into English. I spent quite some time laboring over that one, and I'm pretty proud of how I eventually captured the meaning and emotion of that scene. And players have responded well to those quests too, which makes me extra happy. Next up, they say, something else we find interesting is how things like patch names are often not direct translations, but rather tend to be translated in ways that vary significantly from the original Japanese. We especially like the English word choice for patch 3.1, as goes light, so goes darkness, of which the original Japanese has a meaning closer to the boundary between darkness and light. How does the localization team go about deciding those kinds of translations? Do localizations outside English also follow similar methods? For example, choosing translations that better evoke the story of a patch for the target culture. Kate takes this first. You may be surprised to learn that the English and Japanese titles are decided at the same time. Each patch, the main scenario writer will send a brief summary of what happens with a story and characters along with their ideas for Japanese titles to the English localization team. We then reply with our English suggestions, created through the power of brainstorming terrible ideas until eventually a good one falls out, which utilize the same themes and or keywords as the Japanese. These can be close translations of the Japanese, but they aren't necessarily, so we add explanations of what each suggestion is meant to convey and literal Japanese back translations as needed. Then Yoshida-san takes a look, and there's further discussion and brainstorming in one or both languages until we have a pair of titles for Japanese and English that look good to everyone. It's a different localization process than I think people expect or are used to, but we don't want to present the audience with something they can't get excited about. PS says patches and expansions only have names in Japanese and English. The only time a patch name appears translated into French is once in the related special site and once as a quest name in the main story of that patch. And in that case, we try not to stray too far away from the English so that people understand the reference. Well, there we go. Interesting how they're decided at the same time, actually. I didn't think that was going to be the way they would do it. I thought it would be like the Japanese would come up with a name and then the English would have to try and associate words to make something like it. But some of the Japanese titles are amazing. I don't know why they don't keep some of them personally, but I can see some of the reasons. Next up it says, the localization team is also responsible for conveying the words of Final Fantasy XIV's creators, such as Yoshida-san, to fans outside Japan, at events and otherwise. Is there any unique approach to that kind of translation? David, the representative of German Texas, German representative, he says, as opposed to in-game translation, we go to great lengths to stick as closely to the Japanese as possible. The letters from a producer are phrased very carefully and edited many times so that the right message is being conveyed, and we are trying to stick very closely to the source text. Pierre says, it's very important to convey not only what they precisely mean, but also their sentiments. And to understand the state of mind of the people who will read those words. This is something we always do, even in the game, of course, but we have to be especially aware of this when we translate text from people working on the game and addressing the players. Kate says, yes, I think something that often gets overlooked in translation of this sort of communique, primarily because People are scared to death of being accused of mistranslating the words of important people, is the tone of the message, and the fact that the creator is, well, human person. So we make sure to get across not just what the creators are saying, but Yoshida-san's coolness and professionalism, and Soken-san's casual attitude and offhand expertise in all things musical and the like. There we go. That makes sense to me perfectly, honestly. Obviously, you don't want to misrepresent your employer, really. So lastly, could you please let us hear any words you have for the fans? Here we go. Pierre says, we'd like to thank all of you. Some of you that just discovered 14, some of you have been playing since 1.0, or maybe even since Final Fantasy XI. 14 wouldn't have grown to become such a massive and rich world without your support. By the way, if you have any suggestions or anything to say about the French version, please use the feedback section of the forum. We might not be able to answer very quickly, but we read every message posted there and take your opinions into account. Lastly, did you know the Lodestone has a lot of short stories that expand on Final Fantasy XIV's lore? I found that it's often overlooked, so be sure to check them out if you'd like to know more about the game's story. End quote. And just to add to that, if you want to hear them, I've done every single one as a narrated story. So there we go. Yeah, you can find those on the channel as well. David says, I would like to extend my praises and thanks to the community on taking interest in the localization and going at lengths to report localization bugs in our official forums. This is greatly appreciated, and I can assure our fans that we are watching the threads and fixing as many as we can. Our replies can sometimes take a while, depending on the stage of development cycles, but we try to answer all of them eventually. Thank you. Kate says, what they said. I can also tell you that we definitely check the 14 subreddit and even see stuff on Twitter sometimes. So if you've ever posted about a line you thought was funny or anything like that, you probably made our day. Having so many people interested in the story lore and even the localization itself really makes us feel our work is appreciated, and we're so glad that you love 14 as much as we do. Thank you so much, and see you in game. And Marquis says, we truly appreciate all of our players for playing Final Fantasy XIV and for being so supportive of a localization team. You may or may not know where the language settings in the game are offhand, but I suggest that you try them out sometime to play through a voiced cutscene or battle in a different language that you've never tried before. It's super easy to change the audio from a configuration menu, so you can even keep the text from your own language and switch to different voiceovers for a day. Japanese Day, English Day, French Day, German Day. Make your own little holidays. Each language version is still the same 14 you know and love, but you'll find it interesting how the world comes alive when different cultural and linguistic expectations are at play. I plan to continue doing my utmost with all of the strategies at my disposal to support our dedicated translators in delivering their best work, so I hope that you'll keep playing and come along for the journey to wherever 14 leads. And there we go. Thank you so much to the Final Fantasy XIV localization team, and of course for this wonderful set of interviews. It's been a true pleasure, honestly. I've really enjoyed reading these. It's nice. It's really nice. I think what they should do is on this portal site interview other parts of the team as well, not just localization, but talk about event coordinators, the art team, stuff like that. I think that would be a really nice thing to have, and obviously my viewers on YouTube would like to hear that sort of stuff, as well as, you know, be aware of something like this they can go and click on and enjoy. But I will say, though, the point about the side stories, you're missing out if you've not read from through some of those, especially the Emmett Selk one, for example, that was mentioned in this interview, and a few others. They really add context to characters and backstory that you wouldn't ordinarily get unless you read them. So they do actually contribute towards the game's storyline and fill in the blanks. And for the most part, they are just, well, they all are fantastic. I've certainly got my favourites out of the few, but the Shadowbringers ones, for example, are just amazing, and some of the Stormblood ones are just top-notch as well. But there we go. thank you once again to everybody that was featured in this set of interviews, and of course to the Final Fantasy XIV team, Square Enix, and the Portal site for providing this wonderful information publicly so people like myself can read it and share it with people. I think it's a great thing. I hope they do more interviews. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Let me know what you enjoyed the most and what you would like to see next in terms of like an interview section. Maybe we can talk on the forums about this and try and push more of these wonderful articles and interview opportunities, because I think they're really, really beneficial and gives you a backstory behind the scenes, doesn't it, so to speak. So much love. Enjoy the rest of your day. More videos to come, and I'll see you all next time.